Welcome to Through Your Looking Glass, a podcast that explores the world of research technology. Combining speed and insights, ResTech reflects a deeper knowledge of the people around us. We're leading the conversation about this complex industry, which spans from traditional market research to advertising, media measurement, and beyond. Join us as we chat with experts and enthusiasts in the ResTech community and learn more about its evolution, application, and ever-growing potential.
Well, welcome. My name is Patrick Comer. I'm the founder and CEO of Lucid. And on this episode of Through Your Looking Glass, I'm talking with Sima Vasa. She is the senior advisor of Oberon Securities, which is a middle market investment banking firm. Sima is also the co-founder of Paradigm Sample and host of her own Data Gurus podcast, and also the former chair of SampleCon. And if I'm really honest, I'm kind of nervous because she knows far more about hosting podcasts than I probably ever will. So welcome, Sima, to our little show.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
You've been a serial entrepreneur and obviously an expert within the market research and analytics space for over 2 decades. So to ask I was thinking, I was doing my own count recently. I think we've been doing it both for almost 20 years now. Yeah. So God bless us for sticking with it.
Yes.
But one thing I want to ask about is what you've seen shaping our industry in this particular year. It's been a remarkable year, a challenging year for everyone. And we've talked about significant trends over the past years coming into 2020. But how has 2020 shaped those trends? And what do you see happening in the market research space that may be different than in years past?
That's a great question. I think what we've seen is almost a deeper appreciation for research this year. We've never been through this type of experience before. And really the only way to understand what consumers are thinking about, customers are thinking about, is to ask them the questions, to understand what's happening. It's almost like a rebirth of research. I mean, coming into this year, people were so worried about the future of survey-based research. When you have social analytics, you have big data, you have other forms of data collection, there was a real concern about what's the viability of survey-based research. And, what I've seen this year is there's no substitute at a broad scale to understand what's going on in consumers' minds and, what are their intentions? What are they thinking? And, we've seen that just with COVID-19, but also on the political landscape. It's just understanding where people are. And I think that's the biggest, it's very basic, but I think it's a validation of the need to understand consumers and by asking them the questions.
Definitely this year, all of our customers suddenly need to learn more about their customers and users very, very quickly because everything was changing so rapidly. So it was a year when suddenly doing the research, doing the survey, and doing it fast really mattered.
100%. And I'm sure you could relate to this. Like, it felt like every week was a year, right? It's like,
and we're not done yet.
And we're not done. Okay, now you can go to the grocery store. Oh, no, now you cannot. Every week, it felt like we were all, as consumers and people, doing things differently based on what we learned. It's pretty significant. Now it's I feel like we're going back to the early days of COVID because of the rise in the virus. So it's interesting, how we all shift. And I think the other part that's really interesting is that as researchers, we're asking the questions of consumers, but we're also going through it. So I think there's a lot more empathy around the questions we're asking because we can all relate to so much of what we're asking about.
It's been one of the more profound experiences, especially over the past 6 months as I've connected with our customers and our users on a global basis. No one has escaped the impact of this virus on their lives. And so it's a very communal challenge. Yes. It's a global challenge that we're all facing together, as it were.
It's really, we're going to look back at this and we have so much to learn now, but when we look back, I think we'll learn so much more about our society and how we all reacted to this.
Well, one thing we noticed here at Lucid is how quickly our customers started to adopt technology at a faster pace.
Yeah.
Now, I think this is a trend that we've seen, obviously, on the e-commerce side, some of the most recent numbers of how quickly the adoption curve, say on online shopping has happened, the change in volumes for Black Friday or the week or month of Black Friday that we're having and Cyber Monday as well. Sima, have you seen a change in your view of researchers and how they're approaching technology, given the adoption of, not only online or programmatic technologies, but also the change in terms of their ability to do, say, focus groups or qualitative?
Yeah, 100%. It's interesting. We did a survey among mid-market CEOs, and one of the biggest, not regrets, but concerns was that they were not prepared for the digital acceleration. And I think that's no different in research, right? People had to quickly adapt to being able to ask questions, to, like we said, every week it felt like a year, and to be able to do that quickly, engage consumers, make decisions. It's definitely accelerated the need for that. And to your point about qualitative research, I think we've gotten. I mean, the good thing is we're resilient, right? People are resilient, and so if we can't do the traditional in-person focus groups, people have come up with great methodologies to substitute to be able to really understand consumers in an in-depth way.
Well, I want to switch gears, Sima. I've known you for years in your role, mainly with Paradigm Sample.
Mm-hmm.
But in the past, say, 2 years, and you probably know the timescale better than that, you've really changed your perspective into investment banking with Oberon Securities. So I'd love to learn about, A, how you made that choice and what that transition was like. And then B, what does that role entail? What are you looking for these days that's different? How have things evolved for you?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. It's I've always had this philosophy about my career that, you early in your career, you just focus on moving up, right? You get the bigger job, and it's just what you're supposed to do. At least that's the mindset that I had. And I think, go ahead. What were you going to say?
No, I was going to agree. It's like I thought I was supposed to move up a ladder until I built a new one.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So the thing that I would say the last 10 to 15 years really focused on was challenging myself, was learning, was to be intellectually curious, and really tried to stay true to that premise and put that in the forefront. So, going back to your question about why investment banking, I'd built a career in research analytics. I know a lot of people. And I thought I got my MBA in finance many years ago. And I said, why not? Why not try something new where I can still leverage my knowledge and my experience in the industry, but look at it from a different perspective? And, the other thing, I did not think about this before I did it. But what I've learned in the last 2 years is that as being a founder of a company and an operator, that empathy with the person across the table is so crucial. It's, this, Patrick. I mean, you have scars. I mean, it is painful, and you can't really articulate it. It's like parenting. You can't really articulate how hard it truly is. And so I feel really grateful that I can look at it from that perspective and help clients meet their business objectives, whether it's raising capital, helping them sell their company, helping other companies buy other companies. It's that, I think, is a really unique perspective that I've come to enjoy as I do investment banking.
So from that investment banking perspective, what have you learned about how the research space, or now as many are calling it, especially myself, the res tech space looks like? How does that feel as compared to some of your other advisor peers that may be more focused on other industries?
Well, it's interesting. It's a very black and white story in many respects as it relates to valuation. Either your numbers show the story or they don't in terms of valuation. And, what I've learned is that in research, we've seen so many agile platforms that are coming into the space. They're popping up all over the place. They're gaining investment. The real question becomes, are they true SaaS platforms or are they tech-enabled services? And, I've seen a flavor of a full range of what these platforms do as it relates to, applying services to make sure that there's stickiness to their platform, And a lot of it has to do with, the maturity of the client on the other side. Do they really want the help, or do they, are they empowered? Are they, do they know enough to be able to kind of run the research responsibly?
So how would you coin it now? Do we have a lot of the pure play SaaS, or is there more platforms that are more tech-enabled services that are trying to get to that point of view? How do you see that evolving right now?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's a mix of both. I mean, I think there's still a heavy amount of services for a lot of these companies, just to create that stickiness. It's new, right? I mean, it's
Yep.
still relatively new. People are trying to figure it out, both on the the companies that are building these platforms are in the market, but also for the clients. I mean, we're shifting their world in terms of how they can access research in a really fast, quick manner. So, listen, I think the desire is that everybody wants a pure SaaS platform, for if they're going in and getting capital and ultimately have an exit plan. But I'm not 100% sure it's always going to be that way. It just depends on, I think, the maturity of the client on the other end and how much they're willing to do on their own. Does DIY really exist? I think in some use cases, 100%, but it depends on what type of research people are actually doing. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, we have that same evolution at Lucid. I mean, we launched our marketplace platform the year we went into business. But in terms of it becoming the dominant revenue driver, it took years for that to occur. And it wasn't necessarily because the technology wasn't ready. It was because the ecosystem around us wasn't ready.
Yep.
And that's one of probably the biggest lessons I've learned in launching Lucid and, servicing the ecosystem with a marketplace business model for the first time, is that I've had to be extraordinarily patient with everyone around the company to really understand the impact to the organization, what the value add is going to be for things like programmatic and things like ResTech. It's accelerated dramatically in the past 2 years. I used to think of it as we're pushing that rock uphill over and over again, like sand. And in the past 2 years, suddenly customers are saying yes to technology faster and faster. And in the past 9 months, since COVID started, at a much faster accelerated rate. Like, it's really been surprising. The time to yes has really shrunk in the past 9 months. But I think you're absolutely right. I think a lot of founders underestimate the operating challenge that their customers are going to have in order to adopt their technology in the first place.
Yeah, especially on the brand side. I mean, you could do a reseller model potentially, right? Where you have essentially the services to support the platform play. But when you go to the brands, when you go to the enterprise clients, I think that's where it's a little bit harder.
Yep. So when you're looking at the financials, the numbers of companies, how do you, or which numbers or which rules do you use in order to judge that value or that difference between SaaS and tech-enabled services? What are you looking for there?
First of all, it's retention of clients, right? Is the platform sticky? Growth rate, year over year growth. Obviously, there's a little bit of exception to COVID, but still, you're still in that critical factor where your software, your platform is not getting terminated or put on hold. It's still a critical platform, right? But you might not accelerate the sales during a time of COVID. Profitability, gross margin, right? If you're truly SaaS platform, that margin should be really, really strong. Customer concentration is a big one. And I think people underestimate that, right? You don't want to be dictated by one major customer. And, a lot of us you and I know, like, you need that one customer to anchor around to grow your business. But then you
get it started, to get it moving.
Yeah. And you're so happy. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, we need to diversify quickly here. So that's a big one. And I am, I can't say I'm surprised, but it's an important one. Everybody, I don't think fully understands, as an acquirer, or even investor, the loss of that one customer could be a major damage to the business. So those are some of the general things. You look at the management team. You look at, is this the team that's going to if you're looking for investment, are they going to go? I've said this before, like the darkest of darkest days, will they be able to still persevere and pivot and make it through?
Right.
So it's a bunch of different things like that qualitatively in terms of the intrinsic, how the company and the management team operates, but then obviously the numbers have to actually support that.
So if you were to give advice to founders or entrepreneurs in our space on how to present themselves that you haven't seen, like what do you wish people were bringing to the table that they're not bringing to the table to the day? Because the way I look at it is our ResTech space is relatively new to the concept of going out and raising capital at the scale required to build these businesses. At the same time, we're also relatively new in terms of what I'd call M&A for expansion versus M&A for, I would say, something like EBITDA or to that degree. So my question is, what is missing, and what do you think people knew more about in order to get these deals done?
It's a great question. I think first and foremost, you got to know who you are, right? And just have a really honest conversation, understanding what's the core competency of my company? What is that question about SaaS versus tech-enabled services is a big one, and really understanding how you define that. And sometimes people say it, but it doesn't translate into the financials. And I think we see that all too often. That is the biggest thing. The other thing is not everybody needs to be this type of company. Right. I've talked to many founder CEOs who are perfectly happy with, traditional market research. They might use tech tools to fuel their business, but perfectly happy with, healthy growth, good margin. Right. And I think that's the other thing we need to be really careful about, because it's not one or the other. It just depends on where you want to play.
And so what types of opportunities are you looking for? Is it everything in this space, or is there particular things that are more interesting than others in terms of the types of deals that you're looking to participate in?
That's a good question.
To support?
Yeah. Healthy companies.
Healthy companies
are always good. They're easier to raise money for and to sell.
Yeah.
But I'm attracted to all types of. It doesn't have to be necessarily just one type of company. It's
Okay.
for me, it's like if I believe in your company and I believe in your product and your vision, I'm interested, and the financial support it. Not everything has to be tech enabled.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Well, one thing we've also talked about, Sima, is how ResTech and other technologies are transforming or changing the market research industry to begin with.
Yeah.
And the question comes down to, if all these DIY and SaaS platforms are trying to enable the democratization of research, one, are these new users going to be able to do quality research? And then two, what is the role for what I call the traditional researcher? Like, how do they fit into the model as well? Because you've got this conflict between what I call an established research acumen,
right,
and then onboarding a large set of users who are far less experienced and far less aware of the challenges of research, as it were.
Yeah, we talked about this. I was thinking about that earlier today. And first and foremost, I don't believe in slowing down progress. So this notion of democratization of insights is the future. It's going to happen. So
Right.
I'm of the camp.
It is happening.
It's happening. I'm of the camp of, let's eyes wide open. There's a need that this research is filling, right? People are embracing it. And what is that? The need for agile, quick insights to kind of fuel product innovation, to fuel ad testing, all the different use cases that you and I are familiar with. So that's first and foremost. I think as the traditional researcher, they can play a vital role here. Embrace the change and be able to almost evangelize best practices of research, either to a brand within their research agency. But it is, instead of kind of standing 10 feet away from it and saying, let's wait and see, I really encourage people to get involved and let's put the best practices together. Let's create data literacy. Let's be responsible in the use of these platforms and ensure that people are getting the right value out of the research. So I think there's a huge opportunity for traditional researchers, and I wouldn't even call them traditional researchers. I would say people who understand research and are sound practitioners, because traditional almost sounds negative. It's research practitioners who can apply their rigor, their understanding of what constitutes good research, and combining that with the technologies. And we're seeing that. We're seeing companies that are hiring research practitioners that kind of validate the research platform and understand, almost there's safeguards in terms of what people are allowed to do.
It's almost like we're giving this tremendous tool to a lot of hands. And the question is, does the tool actually create the insights or the data that is actually of value, of high quality?
Yeah.
And I guess the real question becomes, has the tool itself built in those safeguards, those capabilities or not, right?
Right.
And how do you judge that from afar?
Correct.
Or do you even know what questions to ask if you're a DIY user of, is this of high research quality or not?
Yes. And then also when you talk about responsibility, I think people who are using that data, if they're feeding it up the marketing chain or executive management group, those people should be also questioning the validity of the results. So it's not just any one party that's responsible to say that this research is good or bad. As a company, a brand, people should be understanding what is the basis of this research to make sure that it's sound quality research.
That's one of the big questions. How will the quality of research change as technology becomes so much embedded in the entire process? And I think a lot of the error of data collection will shrink over time, because these are the things that we've seen in other industries, financial services being one. As that industry came online and programmatic and automated, the error rate between, in that scenario, transactions shrunk dramatically over time. And so I predict a similar outcome within the research space. It's just going to take time for that to play itself out.
Agreed. I mean, listen, there's also, yes, we're enabling survey-based research in a quick manner, but there's a bunch of other tools that are integrated to that, right? That help with quality, that help with automation and less human interaction. And I think that's tremendous value as well. So to your point of, better quality, of course. I mean, if we don't have human beings having to touch different parts of the value chain and we automate a lot of that, the good news is if you really like to analyze data, you can spend more time doing that.
Yep. Well, in your role as investment banker specifically, how does this concept of ResTech play into how you approach the market? What's the value add? What is the reason it may be important for your work?
I think it validates the industry in many ways, right? Because you can point to other like industries and say, look, we're at the cusp of maybe what ad tech did and MarTech, and now we're at research tech, ResTech, sorry. It gives people something that's relatable to point to and saying that this is now the next evolution of this industry. And in many ways, the conversations are easier. Like, I think we've all joked about when you tell people what you do, you're like, wait, what do you do?
Right.
It's just like market research. That's it. It's quick. We're done. But this gives it a better definition, a carve out, if you will, in terms of what does that really mean to the financial community. It's, I'm sure you've had conversations
so many
to try to explain it. And so, I think this is good. It's going to help in terms of the financial community.
Well, what I saw for years, starting with ad tech, is there are all these stories and articles and even charts saying this industry is growing at a tremendous growth rate, hundreds of percent per year early on in particular, even though advertising globally was growing at 6 to 7% a year. This specific digital programmatic, particularly aspect of advertising, was growing very, very fast.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it got investment and attention. Same thing started happening with MarTech for marketing technology, same storyline.
Yep.
And I remember specifically in raising the Lucid Series B in 2017, we raised $60 million. The challenge is that all of the industry data coming out around market research in aggregate was showing a very similar growth rate, 6 to 7%.
Yeah.
And we had not yet carved out this fast growing technology first SaaS enabled subset that was growing at the 50 to 200% growth rate per year. And so it's hard for an investor to make that leap, regardless of what industry it is. And so I look at this as the ability to move past the investor point of view, or even any outsider to the industry, to move away from what is this to what specifically do you do within the context of ResTech, within an ecosystem or a landscape. So that's why I personally get excited about it, because I'm trying to remove friction to growth, if that makes any sense.
Yep.
That's the way I see the values, removing friction to the conversation.
Yeah, and I think it's as an investor, you do look at the global reports that are coming out of the major industry associations and say, wait a second, how does this? And in fact, particularly last year, I remember that overall, I think traditional research was a slight decline, and you looked at the new things similar to what we were just talking about, and that's where the growth actually came from.
All the growth, yep.
Yeah, and so it is important. I think that the challenge, I don't know if it's a challenge or an opportunity, is how does the industry embrace all of it? For a point in time, we gave up a lot of pieces of the research pie. We said customer experience is not traditional market research. And we took things away because we said it didn't fit our mold. And I just hope that this doesn't happen to this industry, because this is a healthy part of the industry that's kind of helped shaping and defining the future of research.
So it's almost reclaiming what we actually do here.
I think so.
I would put customer experience right into ResTech. Right?
Yeah,
that is
I totally
definitely
agree
part
with you.
of. There's no reason it should be excluded.
Yeah, and it was excluded because it was too simple. Right, that was the history behind it, and now you look at it and customer experience, customer satisfaction is still considered research, but those are valuable components of understanding consumers. Why not include it?
Well, now you have so many ResTech platforms that are asking 1, 2, 3 question surveys.
Correct.
That's their business model.
That's right.
Which is as simple as CX or as simple as CSAT.
Right.
You now have almost some versions of custom research that are as expedient.
Agreed.
So what does that mean?
Yeah.
What does that mean to all of it?
And I will also say it doesn't mean segmentate, the strategic research all has to be done on an agile platform. There's use cases for different types of research, and that traditional. I won't even. Again, I'm going to try not to say traditional. The strategic research plays a big part in the role of what we do as well. So that's not to be forgotten as well.
Maybe the word is tenured. I like the word tenured because it demands experience and understanding, but doesn't mean you're traditional per se. Anyway, just throwing it out there. Maybe we can make that a thing. Tenured
right,
researchers.
Exactly.
Let's create something right now, Sima. Let's do it.
Well, there's some value there. The consulting companies are competing for that research now, right? I mean, it has tremendous value.
Absolutely. And we've seen, the research capabilities from the consulting firms expand. We've seen the consulting capabilities on the research companies expand as well.
Yeah, completely. I see it all the time. And that's encouraging. But it forces change. And I like change, so it's okay for me. But there's other people who don't.
Well, I think this also change will drive multiples, drive interest, drive investment, drive multiples. We've seen multiples across the board continue to improve in the past year, which is kind of counterintuitive to the overall global economic environment.
Yes.
But it's been a remarkable year for multiples. I see a bright future for companies that are playing in this space.
I agree. And I think data, if you just look at the word data, it's a hot word. It's the future. We're collecting and throwing off as consumers tons of information, and there are a lot of investors who are interested in getting into the space,
Right.
and we're seeing it. We're seeing people ask us more and more about it. So I think it's all positive, whether it's survey based research or not. It's all good. It's all good stuff. It's a halo effect for this industry.
So 2 questions around being a podcast host. One is, any words of advice for me? This is episode 3 or 4 in our process here. So you've done many more.
Yeah.
You have a lot more stamina experience. So any words of advice for a relative newbie?
One piece of advice I'd say is have your own metric of what success is for your episodes. Mine is did I learn something new?
Right.
For me, it's like it was valuable time spent for connecting with a guest and learning something about our industry. And then I'd say enjoy the process, which is really hard. I mean, Patrick, I have to tell you, when I get on before a podcast, it's like, oh, do I want to do this or not? Do I want to? And then I get on the podcast and I'm done. I'm like, I'm so glad I did that. That was great. It was fantastic. But it's just mentally getting over that hurdle.
Yeah, you got to get over the hump and get into it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You kind of have that little pit in your stomach. You're like, oh, I hope I ask a good question. You know, all the same stuff that we all say in our heads.
Totally. I'm feeling it right now.
Well, you're doing great.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that from an expert in the field, a tenured professional.
Thank you.
On the same podcast, you've been doing a regular podcast now, especially during this COVID timeframe. What are the key trends you're seeing as you're coming into 21? Like, what are you hearing people talk about that's different than it was maybe a year ago? What are the things that you're learning that you want to share?
Agile research is a hot topic. It continues to come up. Democratization of insights. So it's not just research, but getting insights to a broader audience in a faster way. It's the currency. It's the currency that management teams can talk about, but it can't be stale. It's got to be quick. And how do you get that? So it's visualization. It's being able to get that delivered in a broad scale.
That's amazing.
Yeah. If you really think about it, it's shocking that we still do PowerPoint.
And a lot of it.
And that's just
a lot of slides.
That's just a side note. Like it's amazing that that's still happening. And yeah.
And by we, you mean researchers delivering PowerPoint presentations as the output of insights for their projects.
Yes. I think the other piece is quality. It continues to be central. And consumer privacy continues to be central topic. And, we've seen models where we are, some models just starting where consumers take ownership of their data and they get to dictate play, if you will. So I'm curious to see how that works out, but I'm seeing more and more of those companies pop up. And, listen, I think it's kind of cool. You get to control and monetize your own data. As a consumer, that seems interesting. So we'll see how it goes.
We have Andrew Yang talking about it.
Yes.
Right. And using California privacy law in order to actually activate it. So it's more than just an idea or for technology. There's actually the legal capacity to do something, which is interesting.
Correct. Yeah.
We'll definitely see how that plays out over time. And I love the phrase you had before, which is the speed of insights is the currency for management teams or for business decision makers. Mm-hmm. And so that's interesting because I think a lot of researchers historically would have said the depth and value of the insights would be the currency versus the speed of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, look, if you're going to do a research study to help you define your 5-year strategic plan, you could take some time there, right?
Yep.
You're not going to build your
to do so.
Correct. Yeah, right. Let's not do that in a week. But yeah, people are driving hard. They're making decisions. They have to get that insight quickly, and everybody's got to work off the same page. So the speed of that insights is critical.
Totally agree. And we're seeing that be the key driver of growth for a lot of the res tech or agile customers that we have is speed.
Mm-hmm.
They turn over surveys very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, switching gears to my same last three questions, which are
Okay.
not about professional questions,
Yes.
but the last three.
Okay.
The first one is, what was your first job, and what lessons do you pull from it that you still use today?
Do you include babysitting or no?
That's up to you. You can define it as you see fit, right?
Yeah. Well, I did a lot of odd jobs before I was officially allowed to work and get a paycheck.
Like what? What were you doing?
I was babysitting. My sister and I had a lawn mowing business. We used to cut the neighborhood lawns. And
you did.
and I had an art teacher who needed help cleaning our art room. So I helped clean our art room and just helped her with different errands around the house. And then my first official paying job where I took a paycheck was I worked at McDonald's. And I was so excited that I got promoted to drive-through. I was like, this is my
Well done.
spot. Yeah. I learned a lot. I've always said to my kids, like, if you're not afraid of working hard, life will be fine. You know, just don't, if you don't fear working hard, you're going to be fine.
You do it.
Right?
One of my first jobs was pizza Hut delivery. So
there you go.
I feel you on working for those big consumer brands, and I did that for like 3 summers in a row.
That's
just
great.
Delivering pizza.
Yeah.
It's all paid for education, right?
Yep. After McDonald's, I actually expanded my capabilities to waitressing through college. And that was so much fun because I always loved meeting new people. And, it's a quick way to make some good tips.
Nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Love me some tips.
You're right. Exactly.
Well, I'll switch to the next question, which is around feedback, professional feedback, or it doesn't have to be professional. What's the best bit of hard feedback that you've ever received?
It's tough. I think I'm impatient. I want things done sooner versus later. I've learned, this is probably earlier. I've definitely tempered down that, but just you can't go fast enough. Like we got to keep moving. We got to keep going. Why is it taking so long? And just having some empathy to realize not everybody has that same vibe to get there faster, quicker, sooner.
Was there a key moment when someone said, Sima, you're being impatient?
Yeah.
Is there a particular person that you remember, like this was the moment that you figured that it resonated with you?
Yeah. I mean, I think I had, I've actually had the feedback a couple of times. So
that's recurring. The best feedback you get.
Oh
more than
man,
once.
I feel like I'm being honest. I'm not going to say I'm a perfectionist.
Yeah.
Like that's really the feedback I get. And but the thing that I look at now making excuses is I think that's where innovation comes from too. So it's like a double-edged sword a bit, right? It's like I get so passionate about something. I just want to see it. I don't want to wait. So, but I'm learning. I still am learning that.
It's a hard lesson. I think as an entrepreneur, you're natively impatient because you want to see the future today.
Correct.
Whatever future that is, you want to make it happen. So there's an action around it that's required from you.
Yep.
And I've definitely pushed people too hard, too fast, because I wanted to see the outcome now versus when it was the right time for it. I mean, at the same time, if you didn't have that energy, nothing would happen.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is when you get to quote unquote there, you already have 10 more ideas. The team looks at you and like, wait, we just got here. I'm like, yeah. So that's, just tempering it down, so celebrate that moment. Yeah.
Well, the final question, I totally.
You can relate to that.
It's, as I was saying earlier, the enforced patience of starting a platform with a brand new business model that just didn't exist in the ecosystem before around a marketplace. I had assumed that the adoption curve would be very fast.
Yeah.
And the adoption curve was not very fast.
Right.
We got one customer the first year, a second customer the second year, the third and fourth, the year after, and then build from there. And it was really hard to let that be the reality, that it was so hard to have that patience.
Yeah.
So I appreciate it. It's a decade in now, and there's still what's wild today is that if you go back to the original kind of Lucid formation documents and some of the plans, we're now just getting to some of the ideas that we started with, and not because it's because the maturity of the ecosystem is now getting to the place where it might be reasonable to do some things, which is exciting, but it's taken a long time.
I totally get it.
The final question of these is, what's the most important thing you learned from your mother?
My mom's a fighter. She's a fighter. Yep, she's resilient. We did not have an easy childhood, and she supported 3 girls and as a widow. And she continues even through COVID right now. We went to visit her, sat outside, and she continues to work out every day, to socialize, to maintain some sanity. So I would say, persistence. She actually said the most important thing is your mental stamina. And she would give us different things that we'd have to do to be able to kind of be mentally strong. And I think that's the thing that I've learned the most from her.
You feel like you represent that same fighting attitude, that same persistence?
Yeah, for sure. To a point that it's annoying.
How is it annoying?
Look, I'm raising 2 girls. I'm always talking about you got to work harder, you got to work smarter, you got to fight for everything you want. That can be a little daunting at times. Like if a decision's made and I'm like, I will always I will celebrate it, but I will always say, how could you have done it differently? What approach would you have done? Just kind of really thinking through how would you do things differently? And what do you think the pros and cons of that might be? Hopefully they have the right tools when they leave the house.
Well, Sima, this has been marvelous. I open the floor to you, whether you want to add anything or ask me a question. You ask questions all the time on these, so if there's anything else you want to bring up, I'm happy to address.
What's your hardest feedback that you've gotten, critical feedback you've gotten?
There's like a litany of critical feedback. I'll talk about my first bit of critical feedback. Before I entered the professional environment, I was in theater.
Okay. I think I knew that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I built scenery. I did some off Broadway directing, no acting per se, but, on stage. And my first professional gig was a startup in New York in the late 90s for the dot-com bubble. Mm-hmm. And there were 2 big bits of feedback. One is my wardrobe was a mess. So I just didn't have the clothes to be professional in New York in 1998.
Oh, right? Gosh, right.
And my CEO boss actually sent me to get some suits at that time. I actually paid for my wardrobe, which is a weird kind of critical feedback. It's just one of those moments where I was like, I just didn't have the money or the wardrobe to be involved.
Right.
But more than a year in, so the feedback he gave me was that he said, you walk around this office like you own the place. Mm-hmm. And you're not the CEO, you're like an analyst for me. Right? And so you're pissing people off because you act like you're the boss of things when you're not.
I love that.
And I wasn't sure exactly how to change necessarily, but it made me aware that how I conduct myself every day with everyone around me has impact on, and they read and have perceptions. And I just wasn't aware that was even going on per se. But I could go on and on. I've had many moments of critical feedback in my career.
I have a question. You choose to keep it or not. But the question is this cry for diversity in our industry. How do you see yourself playing an active role to advocate for diversity?
Well, I don't see it just as an industry phenomena. I see there's a responsibility, particularly given that Lucid is such a New Orleans-based company. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the demographics of the parish of New Orleans, it's a majority minority city.
Got it.
And then when you look at the demographics of not just Lucid, but most of the professional environments in this town, it's majority white, if I'm just be very clear.
Yeah.
And so how do we change that over time? How do we actually move the needle significantly, not just gradually.
Right.
And it's becoming particularly acute for me and other technology startups in Louisiana, because part of the dream of the startup is employees have equity.
Right.
And that equity turns into fantastic upside down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you think about it, it's not just the job and the career, it's who gets all the prize money,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Who gets the opportunity to, it could be small dollars in terms of paying off a car loan, up to paying off a house. People used to say around, I think it was Facebook, how many millionaires are we going to create?
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at, well, how many diverse millionaires are we going to create?
Right.
Because those are the leaders that are going to be able to reinvest in a very different way than I would be able to invest.
Sure.
And so that becomes unequivocally important. What I've seen, especially since this summer, not only has Lucid started to accelerate the change within our own domain, what I've really noticed is that our employee base and our teams are more active, meaning they're holding us accountable to achieving results.
Yep.
So it's not just allowing Lucid to say, we're going to do something. They meet with us and hold us accountable to it.
The employees do.
The employees do.
Yeah.
And that's something I really appreciate,
Yep.
because in a business, it's relatively simple to not have diversity be one of your things you're focused on today, because there are all these other fires that are happening right now, and diversity seems to be a medium and long-term work versus today work in the life of a business. And I've also been particularly impressed with our EMEA London-based team, who not only have activated on diversity, equity, inclusion, but started the core group based out of London to work on it within our market research industry. So
That's great.
they're leaders and movers in that particular mission, and I couldn't be prouder of that.
That's awesome. And I'm seeing that I think the term is stakeholder capitalism, right? Where you represent the employees' desires and wants for doing something good in the world. And so I think the younger generation is holding people accountable, leaders accountable to doing what you say you're going to do. And that definitely attracts talent. It retains talent to say there's a higher purpose here of good that we're doing. Obviously, it's still business, it's capitalism, but there's a societal responsibility as well, which I think is really refreshing. It's great.
Word.
Cool.
It is good. Anything else, Sima?
That's it.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to our show wherever you get your podcasts. For information on ResTech, our complete list of episodes, and more, visit luc.id/lookingglass. Thanks for listening.